Hi there, I'm Lily. Welcome to the Vital Horse podcast. I'm a veterinary surgeon passionate about what our animals' behaviour can alert us to. I focus on nurturing the innate nature of animals to address the deep roots of health, well-being and vitality. Our relationship with our horses is an inextricable part of this. I am guided by what they show me. Many people say, if only they could talk, but they can tell us so much and we can communicate back. This podcast is about you being able to help your horse fully by finding out what's going on, deciding how best to help, and then doing this ethically and effectively. In this way, we can investigate and treat behavioural signs and underlying health problems, pain, or dysfunction in our horses while actually improving our relationship with them. Let's find out how. Hi there. In this episode, I'm going to talk about some very special horses to me, and I've got loads of topics in mind for podcast episodes which are very sort of fact oriented and lots of practical tips for you to implement. But I thought that previously I had sort of told a bit of the story of how I had come to see things a bit differently, and had really skipped over quite a lot of things that some very special horses have shown me and been a strong influence on me. So it felt like honouring of them really to do a podcast episode on them. And significantly, it is also just over a year since I said goodbye to one of the very, very special horses in my life. And so it feels honouring of him as well to remember him and some of the important things that that he showed me, but also that he didn't need to do any of that. He didn't need to serve me in any way. He was just incredibly special and an amazing character. So I thought I would start at the beginning with, first of all, learning to ride in riding schools. And I remember, it's funny, I found an old photo album recently and I was looking through it and I was thinking, I remember all of the names of those horses and ponies at that riding school. And there were, I think, 45 of them at that riding school. And I still remember all of their names because I was so enthusiastic about getting to know the individual horses that I just immediately remembered their names. I also had an amazing experience. The first time I ever sat on a horse was on a Shire horse in Wales, on a holiday in Wales. And I remember that amazing feeling of kind of being moved around by her big swinging stride going down this country lane and being able to see over the hedges, over the views beyond, down into these green valleys and everything, and just thinking, wow, I never want to get off. Riding school ponies taught me so much. They were very naughty, a lot of them. That's the label that I would have given then and that other people would have given then. Looking back now and also looking through that photo album, I can see that quite a lot of them had poorly fitting tack, that they had body issues, they had imbalances, they had abnormal postures, they had muscle atrophies. But I think also they did actually have quite a lot of fun as well, going out in these groups with kids who would, there's no agenda other than to just be there in that moment. And I think there's really something to learn from that, because sometimes we can get into it's not exactly a trap, but it can become one, of looking for optimal and for perfect. And whilst it's admirable to strive to improve their well-being and improve our skills and our knowledge and all of that kind of thing, I think it's also important to still remember that joy and abandon and just being in the moment. And I think that animals, they they get that. That's the arena in which they live. They don't live in the arena of optimizing and improving and innovating. And so I think it's worth tempering our self-improvement and our horse improvement with a strong, not just a dash of that, but with a big scoop of that at all times, really. I remember very clearly the first time I fell off, and it was very unexpected because this little Welsh, Strawberry Roan Welsh Section A pony who used to bolt around from the back, from the front to the back of the ride when we would do a canter. He used to go around as fast as possible, motorbiking around the turns. And I was just really not so much learning to ride as learning to cling on. And I remember just winging out onto the inside and landing very lightly, and it didn't really hurt or anything like that. And then lots of people saying to me, well, you're not a real rider until you've fallen off 7 times. And I thought, oh, well then, I've got 6 more times to fall off before I'm a real rider. And actually, foolishly, the next time I got on a different horse, I actually didn't really try to stay on very much, and I fell off then. And because I almost wanted to, in order to get to this magic 7 number of having fallen off and being a real rider. And then realized that that was a bit foolish. That it was sort of it was an expression, and there was a lot more to it than that. So when I was 11, I had the amazing luck that a friend of my dad was a taxi driver, and a taxi driver friend of my dad's who kept his horse at a DIY livery yard that was a bus distance away from where I lived. So I grew up in the town and didn't have a lot of spare money. He knew of a pony for loan at the same livery yard as he kept his horse. And basically, the deal was a small amount of payment and jobs in return for riding. And this was 4 days a week. And this was just my dream come true. And I would spend hours there with my dog. I would spend hours grooming. She was a grey pony, and I would spend hours getting her very clean, brilliant white. And then I would also spend hours out on the South Downs, and with my dog. He was such a good dog. You could even so he understood about curbsides, and I used to ride around the village and then back onto the hills, and I could ask him to wait when he got to the edge of the pavement before a road. I could ask him to cross the road. So he could be on one side, he could be, say, going down the right side pavement of the road, and I could be riding along the left side on the tarmac of the road. And I could direct him and I could ask him to wait. He was just an amazing dog. Didn't chase anything. Anyway, we would go out for hours at a time exploring the countryside. But this first pony, she what I really wanted was a connection, because with the riding school ponies, I'd always found that they might engage with you in some way which was usually a bit bitey, but often they were a bit sort of checked out and not particularly affectionate. And I kind of thought that that was what horses were like. And maybe if you were looking for more that kind of a response from an animal, perhaps you should approach a dog or a cat. And my first lone pony was the same. I would say now that she was pretty shut down and checked out. And one of the things that she would do out riding was bolt. So if we were to turn back for home, she would speed up considerably, and often that would get to the stage of where I didn't have any brakes anymore, and we would be careering back towards home at a gallop. And sometimes I had to turn her. There was a big arable field before this very steep, chalky hill back down into the stable yard. And there were times where I had to steer her into the crop in order to avoid going pelting down this rather slippery and steep slope back to the stable yard. And she used to sort of grunt and squeal and caper sideways before bolting. And I didn't really recognize it as a problem. I thought that it was just her, that she was excited, that she liked to go. But that started to not really make a huge amount of sense to me because when we were leaving, she was extremely slow. So on the way out, she often needed a lot of encouragement and she would walk fairly slowly. And on the way back, she would often be quite difficult to hold. So I then, after her, I then had another lone pony at the same place. And he had some problems where he would swing his hindquarters away when you went to mount. And if you had to get off to do a particularly stiff or heavy gait or something out on the hills, then it would often be very difficult to get back on him because he would either just start walking off or he would swing away every time you put your foot in the stirrup. And he was similar in that he really ambled his way out on a ride and he didn't bolt back, but he walked so fast that it was actually sometimes quite uncomfortable to sit to, which is quite something because usually walking is comfortable to sit to. And I was starting to feel that I really wanted to get to the bottom of why they seemed so unenthusiastic one direction and so enthusiastic coming back. And it didn't seem the explanation of, well, they'd rather be back home than out on a ride seemed rather unsatisfying to me because I was having such a great time. So I wanted them to have such a great time as well. And things like they want their feed when they get back just didn't quite ring true because there seemed to be an urgency to it that seemed more like anxiety. And I started to notice more about their things like their facial expressions when things were happening, like not wanting to be mounted. So I started to get really interested in communicating with them, and I read Monty Roberts' book, Monty Roberts' autobiography, and I became almost obsessed with wanting to be a horse whisperer. I went to a demonstration in the UK by Monty Roberts and had a little bit of a mixed response because I felt like this was something that I wanted to do to be able to communicate with horses. And the part of it that really resonated with me was where we were using principles of the herd dynamics to communicate with the horse in their own language. That I thought, this is amazing. This is really what I want to be doing. I don't want to be imposing my human agenda and communication skills onto the horse. This is what I want to do. And it's quite funny because I'd wanted to be a vet since I was about 6, and I was at this stage about 14. And I said to my mum, I want to be a horse whisperer. I don't want to be a vet anymore. I want to be a horse whisperer. And my mum said, well, be careful about that because it may not, take you where you want to go, which was sage advice because I'm glad that I went through the vet thing, even though at one stage, actually early on in my career, I thought, this is really depressing. I've spent many, many years getting to this stage and I'm not satisfied with the way that I'm working in and the way that the profession is going. So this is why I'm now doing something a bit different. But yes, at 14 years old, I became almost obsessed with wanting to become a horse whisperer. I must have read books within hours. I would devour them. Books on horse communication, books on anatomy and conformation, books on herd dynamics, training methods, how to help problem horses. I had quite a lot of hand-me-down books that were maybe written in sort of anywhere from the 50s to the 90s, and they suggested a lot of very punitive responses to behaviour, quote unquote, problems, like breaking something over the horse's head if they rear, for example. And this just didn't sit well with me. And I thought, why would we do this when basically what I wanted from my horses was a companion and a friend to share things with? So my poor mum. Next thing my mum knows, I am searching online for project horses, and I find a 7-year-old Welsh Section D gelding who is very traumatized and can't be touched. And I saw his photo, and I just thought, I need him, and I am going to stop at nothing, even though I have no ability, even though I have no ability to make this work. So I kind of badgered my mum about it, and she, very sensibly said, "Well, there's no way. We would have to keep him in a livery yard. We know nothing about training. You wouldn't be able to ride, and we probably can't afford it anyway." But I kept on, and my mum ran a farmer's market at that time in our hometown, and I used to bake a load of cakes and sell bread at a stall. I used to do the bakery stall at her farmer's market. And so I did all of these calculations, and I said, Mum, I can afford this if we find somewhere that a DIY livery yard that costs this much, and I can do all of the work, and I can get the bus or I can cycle there with my dog, and I'll look after him, and I will bake the cakes at the farmer's market and cover the costs. So we went to visit Bo, and this is when I was 15 and he was 7 years old, and I still have him now. He's nearly 26. So we went to see him, and he was really quite traumatized. Couldn't really be approached even in a stable. When his owner at the time had first rescued him from what was probably a pretty dodgy dealer's yard, he had his head collar was almost growing into his face, and he would sort of try and climb the back wall of the stable if you just looked over the stable door. Hadn't had his well, actually, he had his feet trimmed, not for a while, because the last time he'd had it done, apparently 7 large guys had held him down, recumbent, so lying down on the ground, whilst the 7th trimmed his feet. He was extremely traumatized by handling in general. But as soon as I saw him, and I tried to do some things with him which were not particularly successful, so I approached him in the stable, and he didn't particularly want touch. I did get to touch him, and he almost dropped to the ground, shaking. He would spook on the spot and then spin, break out in a sweat, and I then tried to lead him back out to the paddock, and he took off to the end of a lunge line and was bolting around with the lunge line flapping. And I was totally hooked. This is what I wanted to do and help him with this. And his owner at the time understandably thought that perhaps him going to a 15-year-old was not the best plan. So she said no. And he went out on loan to somebody else. And very dramatically, I felt like the world had ended. And I thought, oh, I've got to move on from that, but I felt like I couldn't. Anyway, a few weeks later, we were contacted by her to say that he'd been sent back because he had bolted through a load of electric fencing where he'd gone on his new loan home. And would we actually like to try him? And of course, she was being very honest, showing how even more challenging his behaviour was. And I said, yes, absolutely. So my mum thought, well, let's try and find somewhere that has some good support. Because basically what my mum thought, which is an amazingly generous response, and I'm incredibly grateful to her for this, is that despite all of his difficult behaviour and could be bordering on dangerous, actually his fundamental nature was incredibly kind. And so she felt that as long as I kept my wits about me and I didn't push him, then getting injured was definitely a possibility, but it wasn't as if he was aggressive, and there was absolutely no malice, which actually is incredibly rare in horses. He was scared, but he actually wasn't yet done with people. He That you definitely could always sense that he really did want this connection. And I think after all of the shutdown horses I had um, that I had sort of tried to make friends with as a kid, that was almost intoxicating to me, that I could tell that he really wanted this connection. He was terrified. He actually wasn't shut down. So we found a place where there was actually a trainer. And so we thought that it was completely ideal. Aside from the fact that the turnout field was 60 acres and you couldn't catch this horse in a 12 by 12 foot stable currently, we went to collect him with a horse box driver who Bo very generously walked straight into the horse box. And then the driver proceeded to slap him all over his back and sides and rump in order to get him used to the movement of the horse box while we were going. And he was in such a panic that he just sank further and further and further to the ground in his terror. Um, and and I felt just so incredibly sorry that he was having to go through this process. So we managed to interrupt. We managed to interrupt this strange ritual, and he actually travelled very well across a couple of counties back to where we were going to keep him. And I very confidently thought, well, if I'm going to make friends with him, then he might as well be having a nice time when I'm not there. I don't want him to be stuck in a 12 by 12 foot stable because this process might take weeks. So I turned him out in the 60-acre field. Now, there weren't really any other options than turning him out in a 60-acre field or him staying in a 12 by 12 foot stable. And lots of people thought that I was completely nuts and that I would basically never see him again. But what I actually then did, I had enormous patience for a 15-year-old. I just sat in the field, and his curiosity and the curiosity of the other, there were about 10 or 12 horses in the herd in total. The curiosity of them to me meant that actually I did get very close to him. I could just sit down next to him while he was napping within the first 2 days. But my mum was a little bit worried about how long this process was going to take to actually be able to, say, put a head collar on. In fact, I think he still had a head collar on at that stage, and I was just hoping to be able to clip a lead rope on and do a little bit in the field and then let him go again. And just I knew that this process could take weeks, but I was committed to that. My mum was getting a little bit worried about how long this might take, and maybe if he was to get injured or something like that, what we might do. So she enlisted the help of the trainer. And unfortunately, despite the trainer, I thought that this trainer might be along the same ethos as me because of having a Monty Roberts background. And I was then exposed to a very unpleasant process of basically what happened is that the trainer caught all of the horses in the herd, brought them all in from the field to this cattle pen, and so Bo followed. And then all of the other horses were taken back out again, and Bo was kept in there and proceeded to be very strongly chased around for hours in the name of Monty Roberts' process of join up. Now, I actually am not a fan of this process anymore. When I was in my early teens, I was so excited about the possibility of communicating with a horse in the way that another horse might communicate with them. So the explanation of a quote unquote dominant mare disciplining a young colt, for example, and that's the basis of this approach. I thought this was far better than any kind of training approach that I had seen suggested before, which basically used things like gadgets and punitive methods, like breaking something over a horse's head when they rear, for example. So that's what attracted me to it. But even when it's done a lot more gently than chasing a horse around until they can barely stand and the sweat is running off them and they're foaming, which is what happened with poor dear Bo. And I will forever regret that that ever happened, especially under my care, except that I was somewhat powerless at that age to influence what this adult was doing. Um, anyway, so I have some grief about that still. And so I realized that this was not a process that I wanted to be involved in. And so I needed to find something else. And that's when I discovered Linda Tillington Jones and T Touch. And so after this incident, um, I cut off uh, doing anything with this particular trainer. Um, well, actually, I really wanted to, but my mum's concern was still there about my safety, and she did think that I was over exaggerating what had happened because she wasn't there at the time, and so booked another session with this trainer, and then she witnessed um, a very, very stressful process where the trainer actually got straight on Bo, um, a sort of, rapid fire colt starting procedure after um, basically chasing him around until he was pretty much exhausted. And so she agreed we should definitely not work with this trainer anymore. Um, so after that, yes, I discovered Linda Tellington Jones and T Touch, and I did a lot of T team groundwork with Bo. But the thing that really, really influenced me and still does now is the bodywork side. So the T touch bodywork. And the thing with Bo is that he was terrified of being touched, but he actually enjoyed it. If he could get past that, if he could dissolve some of his fear, then he would actually go into this very, very deep state of relaxation, which was very healing for both of us and built this incredibly strong connection between us. And so the importance of body work was really instilled in me at that early age. I did hours and hours of it with him. And it was fascinating the things that he would do, like sort of sobbing, breathing almost, and these big releases. And sometimes he would relax a certain way, and then he would suddenly think, I've let my guard down, and he would be really quite terrified that I was going to do something unpleasant to him. And of course, I wouldn't. And then he would be able to release another whole layer of fear. So I got to the stage with him where I could handle him, I could touch him all over, I could take him for in hand walks, I could pick up his feet. We had his feet trimmed, we had him sedated, and his dental work done, which he hadn't had done probably ever. And we had to move yards a few times in this period of time. Actually, a lot in the period of time between when I was about 15 to 18 when I left for vet school. 19 because I had a gap year. I think I was anyway. It was a few years of preparing to try and get into vet school, and we had to move yards multiple times during that time for various reasons. And I had quite a lot of influences from other horse owners on those yards, a few pressures to do things differently, and was introduced to various types of natural horsemanship. For example, Pirelli, which didn't particularly resonate with me, partly because of the way that it was done. It was demonstrated to me at that time without very much tact in that particular case. I think that it can certainly be done more skillfully. And I also worked with a few other people's horses. And it was the approaches that looked at their body and their balance, and how that was impacting their emotions and whether they might be in any pain, which really resonated with me and which worked, which worked without forcing them into doing something. And Bo repeatedly told me that he didn't want to be sat on. So I tried multiple times. I habituated him to the tack. I think that's probably the right word. So he was never really fully happy wearing a saddle and bridle. He would tolerate it, but I just did it so much, I think, that he got a bit habituated. But it wasn't really him giving me permission. And I tried a few times to sit on him and put weight on him, and he really, really would every single time. There was so much concern, and he was quite polite about it. As in, that's a kind of anthropomorphic way of expressing it, but he was very considerate of my safety, and if I didn't notice that, then what he generally would tend to do was spin very, very fast, and I would come flying off. And in the end, I just thought, why am I doing this when what I am seeking is harmony and a connection? And that isn't happening at the moment with riding, and it is if I'm on the ground. I did lots of in-hand dressage with him, lots of walks, lots of the T-team groundwork, pole exercises, that kind of thing. And we would have this amazing communication, which we still do, and liberty work also. He absolutely loves and excels at because he is super sensitive and he wants harmony. That is what he seeks. He also loves food. um, but he loves this flow and movement with you and this appreciation of space and energy, and you can reach these just transcendent moments of connection in doing that. And I never got that feeling when I was putting any weight on his back. So I thought, well, then he's not a ridden horse. And what that led to was I was looking for a ridden horse because I missed riding. And this was after vet school, actually. So throughout vet school, we kept him in grass livery. My mum looked after him. I'm forever grateful to her for all of her help with that. And his field companion in one of the grass livery places where we kept him during vet school, his field companion called Peps, Pepper, or Peppy, I would call him. His owner generously let me ride him a couple of times, and he was just lovely, and he was just had the most wonderful nature, and they were firm friends. And so when I graduated from vet school and I wanted to find a riding horse and I was moving, I asked Pepper's owner if she ever thought about selling him, could she please contact me first? And I thought I would never hear from her. And then a month later, I heard from her. And so I wasn't exactly ready, but I scrambled together some money and bought him. One of the best things. I mean, Bo is one of the best things that's ever happened, and Peps is also another. And so Peps is the one that I said goodbye to just over a year ago. He was an amazing natured horse. And at first, I didn't realize how much of that was him being very obedient and compliant and his sort of trauma response, and him not really showing me where he was concerned. When I actually walked him from where he was living before to the next place where I was keeping him and Bo, and they'd been apart for a couple of months, and it was so sweet because the reunion was very enthusiastic and very heartwarming. They called to each other, and then they groomed each other all over, and then they stood and had a nap together. It was very, very, very sweet. When I first walked him home, he was absolutely stiff as a board and looked lame in all 4 feet, and I thought, what have I done? And then I thought, well, I know what I've done because it's Peps, and he's just the sweetest natured horse. So if this is another situation where I can't ride, well, I have two friends. And then became a process of figuring out where it was that he might be uncomfortable. And I bought a saddle for him, which I thought was adjustable, and realize now is actually not properly adjustable in any way, shape, or form. You can only adjust one thing in one direction. So, him being very obedient and compliant as he was, and me not knowing any better, there I was. I thought that I had a saddle that fitted him well, and it really didn't. So he would often sort of amble his way along on a ride. If we went any faster, he would rush and jog or go a bit sideways. His hindquarters would go one way or another. There was one ride where he kept peeing, just repeatedly peeing a small amount at a time. And I know now that that was because the saddle was too long for him and it was putting pressure too far back past where the saddle support area really should be. His feet were uncomfortable most of the time, I think. I didn't recognize that until a few years in. I didn't have enough knowledge, even as a newly qualified vet. I just did not recognize that. But I had some really great times with him. And my mum and I used to take him and Bo up onto the South Downs where there's an amazing big vista view. And he loved to look at the view. So does Bo. He loves to look at the view. But Peps would sometimes, in those times where I would think, well, I've only got this much time to go for a ride. And so there he would be, we'd get to the top of the hill and he would look in all directions at the view, very slow and considered, really take it all in, really absorb it all. And I would think, well, come on, we haven't got all day. And he'd look round at me in the saddle. He had this very sweet way of turning his head. He'd do it when you were standing behind him on the ground as well. He'd turn his head around and give you this quizzical expression as if to say, I do have all day. What are you in a rush for? And I would think, ah, yes, thank you. You've reminded me of what's important. He was very good at doing that. He also would sniff the flowers out on a ride as well. It was so sweet going along woodland paths and he would go this way and put his muzzle into a flower. And sometimes his eyes would half close and he'd do these beautiful soft blinks and then these big sighs of contentment. And I think he was actually in a fair amount of discomfort quite a lot of the time. And it was only later on that I realized what I hadn't known and really how poorly prepared we are to recognize pain as vets and how as horse owners we often know that there is something and that we should really believe that intuition, even if someone is telling us, well, there isn't any evidence, we can't see any evidence. Actually, by the way, there usually is if you have a, a better physical examination rather than just a cursory one, and maybe ask some different questions. So I really wish I could have done better by Peps. Um, and when you know better, you do better. There was one time when we were out on a solo hack, and he got very, very panicky about something that he could see in the distance. And usually he was, steady Eddie. But actually, I think that that was partly because he was being very obedient and compliant. And I realized that I didn't provide enough feeling of safety for him for you know for him to be able to regulate himself in that moment. And he panicked so much that he didn't stop panicking. We basically had to do a salvage, try and get back home as quickly as possible, and back to Bo. And I think at that time Sonny as well, uh, in order for him to feel okay again. So this leads me on to Sonny, and this was where I had a truly huge shift. So I'd obviously learnt so much with Bo, and then Peps had kind of been showing me some things, but in such a subtle way that I wasn't really able to learn as much, I suppose. I hadn't changed that much about my approach. And then Peps was getting a bit elderly by that stage. And so I was thinking that I would retire him from riding soon. So I was looking for a youngster. And I bought Sunny, yearling quarter horse. And at first, I found handling and interacting, even just interacting with him, quite difficult. He was very friendly, but sometimes he was too far into my space, pushing on me. He would play fight in the pasture, so he would rear up at me and sort of box with his front legs. And getting kind of strong, and I didn't like the word dominant really ever, but I tried to understand some horse trainers' description of being assertive as opposed to dominant, and it never really fully made sense to me, but I was trying in as much as I could make sense of it. I was trying that kind of approach, and it really didn't work. It was making things worse. He would sometimes get worried and then he would get bitey or more pushy, or he would just completely disengage. As a vet in mixed practice myself, I bought him not yet gelded and was going to do that myself with a colleague. And I did do that with myself with a colleague. And it was a pretty unpleasant experience for both of us. So it involved some very, very strong restraint for giving him the field anesthesia. So we did a knockdown anesthetic, intravenous only anesthetic in a deeply bedded stable. And then my colleague did the surgery whilst I was holding him, monitoring his depth of anesthesia. And following this, he was extremely needle shy because of the very strong restraint for a pretty big needle. It was a large bore needle to get the anaesthetic in quite fast. Foot handling was difficult. He had poor balance, which I didn't recognise just as a young gangly horse, and I was trying to follow a natural horsemanship method that I had watched some videos of, where the trainer doing it did have very good feel and timing, and when I did it, I didn't have good feel and timing. This was using a rope to lift the foot, and he fell onto his knees at one stage. And he got quite phobic about foot handling. Then I was trying to lead and lunge him, and he would be too far ahead of me, he'd be on top of me, he'd be pushing me over from behind, he'd be turning in, he would be bolting away in the opposite direction. And what ended up happening was that I would go out to their paddock, and he would engage in this somewhat manic grazing and ignoring me, like oh please don't pick me kind of response, and that really hurt. And I wanted this harmonious relationship with him that I had really found with Bo, where he would really seek this harmony, and where Peps was just such a gentle soul. um, I was also, seeking that harmony with him, and I unfortunately didn't recognize a lot of his physical difficulties with what I was asking him to do, but he chose not to push back against it. But Sonny was telling me that he couldn't do it, or he didn't understand, or it was worrying him, but he didn't show his worry in the way that Bo did. So I actually, around this time, was getting quite unsatisfied with my vet work as well, and how much in my general practice job we were restraining animals quite strongly. I was learning more about their body language. I was, well, I always had been very sensitive to things like their facial expressions and their body language. It's just that I sort of had gone away from that. I'd gone away from that approach in being very workmanlike in my job, and felt like that was necessary in order to get the volume of work done, which in a way it was. And I think that we need to actually examine our model, because often it doesn't serve the patients, it doesn't serve the clients, and it doesn't serve us as the vets either, ultimately. And so I actually I went on quite a deep dive of alternative approaches, and especially in communicating with horses, and and also in our medical and surgical interventions with them. And I discovered some personal things that were also making me fairly unhappy and frustrated. And so I was bringing that also to my horses, so that wasn't helping. And I actually went all the way to using exclusively positive reinforcement at first. So, what was really instrumental was I started listening to Warwick Schiller's Journey On podcast, and that led to me discovering lots of trainers that do things in a different way. And some that have been incredibly influential on me include Madison Shambo, Mustang Maddie, and through her I found Peggy Hogan, Karen Rolfe, and then also through exploring some of the concepts that these people were introducing, I discovered the postural side of things, and things like hoof alignment and dentistry, and I started to go off down what the veterinary stuff that I could help with was. I also returned to T-Touch, and have been back. So I spent a lot of time at the UK T-Touch Centre as a teenager, and I've since been back to work with Sarah Fisher more, and that has really, really influenced my attuned assessment approach. So her animal-centered education free work has really influenced my approach. I've learned so much from all of these mentors, and one of the things that Maddie really helped me with was being able to go back to actually using some amount of negative reinforcement training. So that's what I did with Bo. I did very, very sensitive pressure and release, but I didn't know how to do that if a horse was pushing into pressure. So Bo always wanted to yield to pressure, and he would find a lot of pressure way too much. So it was always very soft. But that was also because there was still a layer of fear there. And what Maddie's really helped me with, despite me going to develop my positive reinforcement skills, is to help horses to find pressure as information as opposed to as something that is really aversive to them. Anyway, Sunny has been such an amazing teacher all the way through my process. And I know I've said this before on the podcast, I mention it a lot because he is the reason that I am doing what I'm doing now. He's the reason why I it was a huge wrench, but I gave up where I was living and my previous job where I absolutely loved my colleagues and all of my clients, and it was really quite a difficult thing to do. But I wanted to dedicate my time to this kind of work and to helping other horse owners who, might have had a similar experience as me with their personal horses. Because really, at the end of the day, what's important to me is my relationships, whether that's human or animal, and communicating better and understanding each other. And so if my vet work can inform on that, which I think is so important, horses are usually either just coping when we come up against problems. They're either trying to cope with what they're asking us to do, or they're telling us, I really can't do that right now. And so I've made it my mission to help to decode what it is that they are saying that they can't do right now. And whether that's a lack of understanding, whether that's a physical restriction or a dysfunction, or whether that's discomfort or pain, and then helping them with that. So I now I look at the postural rehabilitation side of things, because a lot of horses do have some postural dysfunction that stops them from being able to carry out some of our requests and even just be comfortable in themselves if we're not making any demands on them. their internal state, so things like their metabolism and the workings of their internal body, working with how they are adapted to live, how, you know, horses needing to be horses as opposed to conforming to our routines, and how we can practically give them a lifestyle and management that helps them to do that. And then how do we communicate with them when we're training and when we're asking things of them. And I could really go on and on about special horses. Ellie, Sonny's full sister, who his breeder practically gave to me a few years ago, which I'm so grateful for. And she has really, she's quite similar to Sonny, but different in a lot of ways as well. And she has really taught me about asking permission. And when she gives you permission, you can you can do so much. She's so unbelievably generous. She's very exacting. So if you truly ask for permission, then she will honor that you have asked for permission. If you kind of fake ask for permission, then she says, no, 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 try again, try again. Um, my other horse, Willow, who I've had for just under a year actually, has really shown me about just friendship. Really, she is such a firm friend to other horses and to me. And some of the rehab cases that I have boarding here, particularly Tonto, he is he teaches me things every single day. He's another horse that is obedient but can sometimes be worried or doesn't particularly want to participate in things. And they can be some of the most challenging horses because it's easy to take their obedience, to be complacent, and to take their obedience as permission. And it's not always the case. And so, really exploring that with him has been an amazing process as well. And I could go into a really long discussion of every one of these horses. But suffice to say that I'm incredibly grateful to all of these amazing horses that have helped me, to help other horses and people with their horses. I would love to hear the horses that you are grateful for. I know that there's sometimes a discussion that comes up about not sort of using horses as in using them as therapy animals, so for our own therapy. And that's not exactly what I mean by what I'm saying, because I don't expect my horses to fix me. I don't expect them to have to absorb my emotional, if I'm in a bit of an emotional, almost a mess, I don't expect them to fix that for me. But these horses have led me to figure out where it is that I'm struggling personally in my own life, and I'm sure they will continue to do that. And I will be forever grateful for the life lessons that they teach me. I guess I will just end by saying that I really feel strongly that horses do not owe us anything. Um, we do a lot for them when we domesticate horses and we are their guardians. We do a lot for them to look after them, but that doesn't mean that they owe us anything in return. And at the same time, despite them not owing us anything, they give us so much. They are so incredibly generous with what they gift to us. So, a massive thank you to all of the horses who have been in my life and will continue to teach me all of these important lessons. And stay tuned for more podcast episodes because we have some exciting guests coming up, and I'm going to start giving you some practical pointers into my 4 deep roots to health and well-being that you can put into place to improve your horse's lifestyle and your communication with them and their posture and movement and their comfort. So see you soon. This is a quick reminder that the Needle Shyness online course starts running live for 12 weeks on the 1st of July. For an ethical and effective approach to helping needle-shy horses, go to www.nurturingnatureequine.co.uk/needles. Thanks for listening to the Vital Horse podcast, where you can find discussions focused on helping horses in ways that combine scientific principles and evidence with compassion and understanding. Do subscribe if this content has rung true for you. To work with me in a way that honours both head and heart, check out my online and in-person offerings at www.nurturingnatureequine.co.uk. If you are facing problems or are trying to answer questions with your horse, remember that physical, mental and emotional well-being are inextricably interconnected, that there is a wisdom to nature and to the body that we can assist, and that cultivating meaningful relationships with our animal companions holds an important key to the well-being of all of us. Deep awareness and a compassionate process will enable us to find sustainable, ethical solutions. See you for the next episode and look forward to working with you too.